guys, it's Toniko, and the first half of this year has been a quite busy experience for me. And one of those reasons is because I spent a bit of time doing some 3D classes with Blender. Now, when it comes to me dedicating myself to learn something, I need to give myself a reason to force myself to learn these things. And one of them is to actually sign up for a class because I'm paying for it and I have to make time for it to hit the deadlines of, let's say, the homeworks and assignments. Now, of course, there's hundreds and thousands of tutorials on 3D regarding Blender. And of course, there's a lot of good ones out there. I think most of them, however, feel more like press this button to make grass or press this other button to do this effect and put these numbers to suddenly have a pillow for your bed. Now, I don't think there's anything wrong with those tutorials. I think they're very valuable. It's just that I like to learn things differently. And some of those ways include interpretive, instinctually, and project-based. So, a lot of my artists and animation friends signed up for a 3D Blender class held by Asuza Tojo. And I was really impressed by a lot of the students' work because you could tell that a lot of their sensibilities and style was implemented beautifully in the 3D assignments. Now, Asuza Tojo's class is in high demand. I actually got waitlisted like about twice for 2 years. And then for this year, I got waitlisted again. But I think someone gave up their spot, so I decided to take that spot immediately because it's like, yo, I got waitlisted twice, and maybe this is a good time for me to actually force myself to just try Blender out more, give it more of a chance. And just to summarize quickly, this is not the first time I've used Blender. I used Blender to produce the opening for my YouTube channel. I've played around with grease pencil, I've experimented with stuff using Blender, so it's not that I'm not familiar with Blender, but I've never really took the time to learn modeling and rendering and just making stuff purely for Blender. Now, I work mostly in the 2D space. I work in storyboarding, I've done 2D animation, I've done character design, I've used Blender to put cameras in sets and then use that as my storyboard backgrounds or animation backgrounds. But now I want to be more familiar with Blender so I can actually use it as a big part of my process. Now, before the course actually started, Asuza Tojo gave us an assignment to make a ramen bowl and follow along a video tutorial that she made. This was just to get used to, let's say, the shortcuts or the functionality of Blender before moving on to the actual class, which moves pretty fast. The video tutorial was about, let's say, 40 minutes or 30 minutes, but this assignment took me a good 3 hours. Because for this assignment alone, each thing that you see in the ramen bowl, like the egg, the chashu, the noodles, they all introduce a completely different methodology or technique in Blender. Oh, and it was a small introduction to things like materials, shaders, and lighting. Now, I just made another bowl filled with rice, but each tiny grain of rice that you see is its own object, and it nearly crashed my computer because I tried to duplicate hundreds of those rice in that tiny bowl. I'm kind of happy with how mine turned out, but I'm pretty sure I could have spent more time really finessing, let's say, the dining table, the set, and maybe model other dishes. Now, the first official assignment was to build a floating house or a floating landscape. This was, of course, to get more used to modeling, shaders, lighting, etc. I think the biggest thing about this too is this was the first time that I was really forcing myself to utilize references. I've been playing a lot of Arc Raiders lately, so I've been on a sort of retro futurism craze, and of course to sort of give an identity to this floating house or building. My idea was sort of this floating hotel inspired by the Japanese architecture movement, metabolism, which was this idea or movement from the 60s where the building was held together by something that resembled a spine, and along those spines were modular, replaceable units being living spaces. And let's say based on the needs of this foundation of the building, these units would be changed and replaced to adapt to certain circumstances or time, like a human body just adjusting to things. I thought of doing this floating hotel where this trailer, which was a pretty hard and complicated thing for me to model at the time, would be like the front building or the kiosk, and then everything behind it are like little rooms where people could just rent and sleep. The point of this assignment was to tell a bit of story. The feedback that I did get from Asuza was to actually think more about the story, not just what the set or building is, but things like something cooking in the grill, or let's say some clothes hanging just to show that this place is lived in, like people live in this space. Initially, I wanted to do a windmill in the sky, but I think a lot of people had that idea, and of course a lot of people like to reference Gorillaz, the El Mañana music video. Week 2 was to choose 2 screen grabs from maybe 2 different movies, and then recreate a simplified low poly version in Blender. Now, the point of this assignment was to actually introduce us to, let's say, sketching in Blender. At the same time, the emphasis was more about lighting and mood. And I really like this assignment because it really forced me to look at the reference. I didn't have to come up with something from scratch. I could just try to challenge myself to try and recreate something that exists into my own interpretation in Blender. But I learned a lot about like how light sort of works or what I'm responding to. I started noticing things like how fog affects light or how light bounces off certain surfaces and how that emits on certain characters. I personally feel like I did a pretty good job. And it was kind of cool to show it to my friends who couldn't tell which one was the live action reference or the Blender set from a first glance. Now, the third assignment was to model an interior. I came up with this idea of a sci-fi yurt in a desert, or like an igloo. I was thinking of, let's say, the capsule house in Dragon Ball, or the houses in Tatooine in Star Wars. And of course, I really just wanted to model retro futuristic tech, like analog sci-fi stuff. I actually thought of a character from an idea that I have, Dream Bandits, and tried to model what kind of place one of the characters would live in. And I wanted to make it her hideout, what her living space would look like, how she customizes it, how she treats her belonging in that set, just so that I could practice my storytelling when it comes to props. I thought of things like books, plants, a hoard of treasure because she's a treasure hunter, and she has a sci-fi gun that maybe she just leaves lying around. Maybe some CRT TVs to, let's say, watch TV, to check the weather outside, or to check system status. Now, I think the main feedback or the thing that I probably could have done is just to model and spend way more time just dealing with 1/4 of the room instead of trying to model the whole room, because I think it was kind of hard to sort of prioritize what side of the room or what angle of the room I wanted to render. And I could have just spent more time on the detail of other things like the desk and the bed. Now, the fourth assignment was to do character busts. We had to do two. This was to learn a bit of the sculpting tools in Blender while introducing the use of UV maps. But I think this was also low-key introducing us to the parent system, where I would parent the head to the neck and then parent the neck to the torso. So if I were to move one thing, everything else is parented to that. And I could also set the pivot point, so if I wanted to rotate the neck, it would come from the base or the bottom of the neck rather than the middle. Honestly, I'm not super happy with the way mine turned out, just because there was a lot of clipping with the hair, with the clothes, with certain parts of the face. And a lot of the end results that you do see are quite accidental. Things just happen, and I was like, meh, well, let's just run with it. So I feel like a lot of the choices were not decided by me. I will also say that this isn't a fully functional head or model. It's just a bunch of sculpted spheres and primitives stacked onto each other. As a 3D model, if you were to look at a wireframe of it or a topology of it, it just doesn't make sense. But I think for this class, it was more about just making something rather than getting it right at first. And, getting it right and getting it proper, that stuff can be figured out later once you kind of have an idea of how to just make stuff on Blender. I did a beat up guy in a fight club, and then I did some stylistic elf girl in some fantasy setting. And as you can see with sort of the elf fantasy girl, I used the grease pencil tool to draw her eyes, her eyebrows, and her lips. Whereas a guy, it's all just basic shapes and primitives. Now for the fifth assignment, instead of just a character bust, it was posing out a full body character. And, Asuza was teaching us how to do low poly characters, which I actually cater towards too. I love that shit. And not only do they have to be full body characters, but we also had to pose them out. So body parts would be treated as its own object. The torso was its own object, the upper arm was its own object, the palms and hands were its own object, and we would just parent them to each other so we would be able to pose them out. It's not a clean official rig, but it's just there so we could pose things out. The point of it was just to make a makeshift rig that really wasn't a rig. Instead of doing one character, I did two, and I based it off one of my student films, Crayon Dragon. I modeled the girl first, I wasn't really happy with it, and that's why I decided to model the dragon. And, different character designs forces you to treat them very differently in the way they pose or the way you model them. I'm not happy with how this assignment turned out, but at this point I'm starting to realize the way I approach my drawing, which is very loose and very undefined, is sort of showing in my 3D. It's an interesting observation that I made and something that I do want to revisit. Now for my sixth assignment, it was to animate a flying vehicle. This was to introduce us to, let's say, animation, the spleens with it, and certain modifiers to make particle effects, for example, and to animate a makeshift rig which is the ship. And we also had to have a pilot or a character driving it. So I had to model another new character, which is already a lot of work, and then I had to pose them out to my vehicle. And then using certain modifiers and animation hacks, I would make her hair wiggle and move as she drives. But this is where a lot of my parenting is put to the test, because I had to parent the character to the motorbike or the hover bike, and then parent certain parts of the motorbike to the overall body, like, having the wings shake a bit, having certain things sort of tremble a bit, and then all that together swaying through the landscape as it flies by them. Again, I was learning how to use particles for, let's say, the smoke coming off the jet, and then cheating a speedlines effect using a cylinder with certain modifiers and shaders to it. Just to add more drama to it, I went out of the way to model some robotic beasts chasing this girl. These aren't rigged properly, they're just objects all parented to each other. And then that would be parented to an overall empty, and I would use that empty to move the actual thing without affecting its limbs or other parts of the body. So this was very hard and very tricky for me, and it left me with a very messy result. The moving background is really just a giant sphere stacked with trees on it, and then I had to render it. And rendering took me hours because my computer is over 10 years old now. And what I came out with, it's fun. It was cool. I thought it was a really cool attempt. I could do better for the next time, but man, I definitely need a better computer for this. Alright, the 7th assignment was to sort of build a set along with a character. Technically, the assignment was to build a camping set, but I think a lot of people, and even Asuza, was encouraging us to just, if we wanted to, go further than that, as long as it utilizes some form of nature. So for this assignment, we were being introduced to particle systems again, especially if we wanted to have blowing leaves. We were introduced to a bit of physics. I didn't really use it for this assignment, but she showed us how to utilize water physics, and if you had a character walking through or in that water, there would be ripple effects, and it would all be calculated in real time, which was super cool. We also learned how to utilize particle effects to do the leaves for the trees, to do blades of grass and flowers and moss within rocks and landscape. And I think this is another big assignment that took me forever. I modeled 2 characters. One is this night dog that you've probably seen in some of my animation tests, and the other is this sleeping, elegant elf woman, and it's just him carrying her while he walks in the water. I wanted to have this thing that's kind of tranquil, somber, and kind of Lord of the Rings-y. This one was very difficult for me to do because I couldn't exactly decide what kind of mood I wanted to portray visually. I didn't know if I wanted fog or if I wanted the lighting to be minimal. Did I want the lighting to be completely on the background, or do I want some of that lighting to fall on the characters? Or how the colors of, let's say, the leaves or the grass or the flowers really did affect the overall feeling of the scene, and it would change that feeling if I were to alter some of those colors of the leaves and the flowers. And if there was lighting in the foreground, do I want a lot of that lighting to bounce off to sort of give it that radiant feeling? It was just so hard. I even collected so many references of lighting that I like, but at the end of the day, it's not like you can cheat in 2D by doing a paint over or doing a gradient and everything is fixed. It's like I have to really adjust the lighting in the scene and somehow making it work without creating more accidents. So the last assignment, unfortunately, I never got to finish just because I just got so busy and burned out with a lot of things happening. I was doing a lot of freelance, I had a full-time, and then I had this, which took me a couple of hours every time I finished work. I feel like this assignment was kind of similar to the last one, but the main objective was to utilize certain rendering techniques. So you could separate each of these layers and then put them in, let's say, Photoshop or some 2D painting program and do some paint overs. How to make the paint over process a lot more streamlined. This one was a cool one because she taught us how to, let's say, render foregrounds and backgrounds separately, how to render lighting information separately, and then how to combine all of that in Photoshop. It was really cool. I never got to that part though. I think for this assignment, the emphasis was trying to take a set that feels more urban or more downtown. So I just chose some place in Chongqing. Really fascinated by that area. Makes me want to visit. It's really beautiful. And to have a character, which unfortunately I never got there. Because, man, modeling those buildings was also a whole challenge of itself. Just making sure the lighting works, making sure the shapes match, and then just trying to decide how much I want to copy the reference lighting or how much I want to push it. So unfortunately, I never finished this one, but I will say that, I learned a lot from it. So yeah, part of why I've been inactive is because a lot of it was work and a lot of it was for that 3D class, And after doing this class, I can say that I'm not good or perfect at 3D, but I'm confident just to make things. I can now build sets for backgrounds for my animated projects. If I needed to, I could model a low poly version of a character and then pose it out and then use that as a reference for certain posing reference. I want to turn my channel's mascot into a plushie, so now I can model prototypes or mock-ups of that plushie in Blender. I think some of the biggest things that I started to value that's actually affecting my 2D work was I pay closer attention to reference, and I really actually enjoy utilizing reference. And if I'm, let's say, dealing with backgrounds or drawing backgrounds, I now can think about story. And because of how interpretive or how much you can improvise and be spontaneous with 3D, in a way, I feel like it kind of helped me deal with my art block. Because I think one of the reasons art block persists is there's a certain anxiety or fear of making sure you have to get it right, or all the stuff that you have to do just to get an image done. Whereas in 3D, you can be a bit more creative. Like if I model a tree, I can shrink it down, put it in a pot, now it's like a little bonsai tree or a plant. But I will also say that doing 3D, I can also understand the frustrations with it. Like if I were to summarize my overall experience with 3D, that bottle, that big bottle, and there's like a miniature ship in that bottle? And to build that ship, you kind of have to just put pieces of that ship through the hole or the opening of that bottle. In ways, it felt like that because if I were to move an object in a 3D space, but if I turn the angle a bit, I'm way off to where I actually want that 3D object to be at. What works in one angle, you might want to adjust it in case it looks wonky in another. It made me highly appreciate and enjoy 3D, and honestly, it makes you want to explore that world a bit more. But there's a huge reward in learning things. Doing Blender and 3D, it's frustrating. The more I used it or the more I played with it, I'm getting a little more confident in that. I'm being more creative in my problem-solving skills or coming up with creative solutions, and I'm getting faster at it. And that's the kind of reward that I love getting that AI doesn't really have it for me. To me, I think AI-generated art takes away the fun of learning and processing and wrestling with the medium. Everything that I do is a decision that I make. And if I wanted to, let's say, adjust something or change something, I know exactly what I want to do. Whereas with people who just rely on AI-generated art, they're at the mercy of some gambling system. And in most cases, I don't think they know what they want or what needs to be adjusted or fixed. Sorry for that little rant. Anyways, that's all I want to talk about. Bye. Interested in learning hand-drawn animation or learning how to finish an animated shot from beginning to end? Have a look at the store where you'll find the complete Introduction to 2D Animation video course, tutorials, and other resources. Learn classical animation approaches, drawing, lectures, techniques, and other process videos. Visit the store through the link in the description below.